Welcome, Wargamers, to the ancient rubble of the Old Dominion, because today we are talking about a very cool unit from the game Conquest, Last Argument of Kings, and Conquest First Blood, if you are joining around with my Paint-Along League. And that is the Bone Golems. This is a brand new unit that came out in June of 22, I believe, all for the Old Dominion. And they are some of the coolest models that Para Bellum has put out. And today we're going to talk about their lore, a little bit about what they do in the game, and just kind of unpack why are the Bone Golems so stinking cool. Now when you hear Bone Golem, you might think of a literal, creature that's made of nothing but heaps and heaps of bones, but in fact they are more like sarcophagi, if you will. Stones, graves, and that kind of thing that are kind of molded together. Yes, there are bones on them, but they are not completely, osseous monsters. They are stone, rock, and steel, but wreathed in death. Now, if you are interested in this particular regiment or anything to do with Conquest, it would absolutely mean the world to me if you would use my affiliate link in the description down below. It'll save you 10% on all of your purchases, saving you money, and it goes a long way to supporting me because Para Bellum really does care about its content creators. It's so exciting to be a part of a gaming community that is so welcoming and excited, and a game company that backs up its content by helping people like me. It goes a long way to supporting me, the channel, my wife, our cats, everything. Thank you so much to everyone who has used that link. So, jumping into the meat of today's story, let's read the lore entry for the Bone Golems, and then we'll kind of go back and fill in some detail for folks who are new. In their quest for knowledge, the Dark Creed uncovered many secrets best left alone. Prime among them was the fact that the very stones of Capitas, a city, were soaked with so much death and so much of Haslia's essence during the fall that all they need to heed their master's call to murder the living was a simple, motivating consciousness. These massive constructs wreak havoc on the battlefield, their massive forms soaking unbelievable levels of damage as their massive limbs scythe through enemy formations. Little overuse of the word massive, but I respect it. And so let's kind of unpack this for folks who may be new to Conquest. Essentially, in the history of the game, there was a deity of mankind known as Haslia, a god that realized that by absorbing the worship and adoration of this little puny race called humanity, it could ascend and gain power and kind of craft whatever will it wanted. This is not a good, wholesome god, this is a jealous and almost selfish one, known as Haslia. At one point, Haslia kinda went crazy. Humanity rebelled against their own deity, separating from the people who wanted to go away from Haslia, and then his faithful, right? The church, the devout, the followers, people who stayed in Capitas, the city of the Old Dominion, became the faction that we know as the Old Dominion. Everybody else ran over the mountains, ended up in the Bitter Sea, and then we have the first foundings of the 100 Kingdoms, humanity's successor. And even though they left Capitas, things got real bad over there because that ruling religious class, specifically the Dark Creed as they call themselves, began to really delve into ways to, we'll say, bring their deity into the physical world. When Haslia was finally struck down by humanity, its essence merged with the primordial god known as Death, and so we have a living, undead god. So that's how we have a death-themed faction. Well, death magic permeated this city so much that even the very, infrastructure, the buildings and the roads and the walls and the gullies, and all of it is just subsumed in a type of macabre magic. And so these, priests and stuff, they're raising undead from tombs, basically being calling all of the followers and the devout of Haslia, awaken from your tombs and come, let's march in favor of our deity. But at some point, someone got really, really crafty and was like, I'm getting a good vibe from this pile of rocks over here, guys. Which is a level of stone I've never had. But, if you're getting a good vibe from a pile of rocks, that's awesome. But essentially, they realized that their entire environment was so saturated in magics that all it needed was a tiny bit of a mind to be able to do things with it. Right? All the things you need for life and to turn a golem into an existing thing. The animus, if you will, is there. It just doesn't have a brain. And so they started taking these huge sections of concrete, parts of old forgotten tombs, vaults, castles, walls, all of it, anything that had, death magic in it, and you basically just craft a body from those things. And that's why the actual Bone Golems models are these very clunky, they almost look like dreadnoughts from 40k if you're familiar with them. But they are these big, shambling, clunky constructs. And that's the thing I want to touch on. They are, again, constructs. When you hear Bone Golems, you think a construct made of nothing but actual bones, and while there are plenty of bones and death iconography all over these guys, it's the actual blocks of the capitus, that are so overfluven with death energy that they want to bring that death to everything around them. Now, to give you a sense of what they are like thematically, we can actually look at their rules within the game to kind of get a sense of like, they're mirror reflections of each other, right? What are you trying to convey to turn that into game rules? But sometimes you can look at game rules and be like, yes, this is what they're portrayed as in the lore. So if we look at that, basically they are soulless because they don't have souls. They're just big piles of rocks with just enough of a brain to be pointed in a direction and murder things. They have aura of death too, so they exude like you would imagine from rocks that are so infused with death magic that it permeates around them and people outside of the rocks can sense it. So aura of death is like this death magic wreath that goes around all of them and infects anyone who comes near them. And the most important thing is hardened, so they're going to ignore any kind of armor piercing and that kind of stuff. So hardened 1 with 6 wounds. I don't know. The point is I'm trying to get at is they are meant to represent very slow, plodding, heavy hitters that do not want to quit. They don't have a resolve. Like a lot of stuff in the Old Dominion, they don't run away. Instead of running away, they just want to park it and get up in your face and ruin everything. And here we go to my favorite run-on sentence with 3 uses of the word massive. Constructs wreak havoc on the battlefield, their massive forms soaking unbelievable levels of damage as their massive limbs slide through enemy formation. So there's not a whole lot more to get from that. I think that's all pretty self-explanatory. But one of the things I do love about their models is simply the amount of detail in them. So they look like sarcophagus or building sections, tombs, all of those things just given a type of unlife. Personally, they are my favorite models in the Old Dominion range right now. They just have a presence. Some of them even have like shields tied around them just to kind of give them even more armor and versatility, or durability rather. And so let's kind of pause there talking about the Bone Golems and turn into why is this cool? If you're new to the channel, every time I do a lore video, I always want to end by asking the question, why is this cool? It's one thing to read the lore, it's another to kind of put it in context here for the actual world building and what does this mean for the overall story and just kind of just gush all over it and talk about why it's awesome. For me, this represents a few things regarding the Old Dominion. The first of all is that nothing is laid to waste. By that I mean, when Haslia fell and became, our new god of undeath, so to speak, it raised up all of the dead who were faithful to it in their lives. So that's why we have an undead faction. All those soldiers, the Praetorian Guard, they're all raised from their tombs in, honorable warrior chambers and that kind of thing. And while it makes perfect sense, like, oh yeah, he would raise his own faithful, not leaving anybody down is a big deal because, of course, there's going to be all different kinds of quote-unquote personalities that exist within those soldiers, but even the very structures themselves have been recruited into a military purpose. When we talk about the 100 Kingdoms, we often can kind of correlate them to sort of a medieval type level of technology where you have cities and holds and stuff and they form armies and those armies go out and fight and conquer and defend and all that kind of stuff. But you also have this thing called the home front, which is people existing, creating food and weapons and munitions and all those things that the army needs. The Old Dominion does not have a home front. Instead, it is its own pile of resources and they are trying to make every single one of them into something that just wants to murder. Like, cue your black metal riff. That is awesome. Of course, you can look over a city and if you're the god of undead and you can resurrect them, of course, yeah, raise all your soldiers up. It's a different level of, we'll say, inspiration or creativity to look at the rocks and the actual rubble and ruins and be like, I got a great idea for that. We're going to turn those into weapons. So I like that nothing is off the table for the Old Dominion. If there's a resource that exists within their boundaries, they will turn it into a instrument of murder at some point. And nary a building's foundation or hunk of concrete is safe from this. Now, the other thing that's kind of less laughable that I want to point out here is the true impact of Haslia's fall. The event that they called the Fall in that story is when Haslia was struck down, went to a point of death, and then merged with, well, not fully merged, but got a piece of the primordial god Death mixed in. I covered this in my Old Dominion lore series. Please go check that out here on the channel if you'd like to see more. But when that event is described, at least initially in the books, it's easy to read that and go like, okay, well, so the god went down and came back up again and then raised all his, his favorite followers. Makes perfect sense. But what's interesting that we get from this little lore bit, even though it's so tiny, is it almost seems like the event of Haslia coming back or dying, I'm not sure which one it is, almost had like a radioactive effect. Like that things around Capitas, everything became saturated. I liken it to a nuclear bomb going off, right? Where radiation just permeates in an area. Whether or not you get knocked over from the blast or not, its energies have, again, seeped into everything, including the rocks and stones and all that. And my point is, I don't feel like that was very well emphasized in the original Old Dominion lore bits on their website. This little nubbin of a story, this half a paragraph where most of it is the word massive, tells us that when that event happened, the fall happened, it is like the epicenter of death itself spread out from the cradle of mankind. Everything became the ground, the stones, the parchment, the shield, every piece of fabric, everything became saturated in death magic. So it makes it a much more momentous thing just by these little after effects that we can read about. All of that goes together to making the fall a much more dramatic event to the point where it turns buildings into murderous, golems. How cool is that? But also raises questions like if these guys are each individually nodes of death magic, right? They carry it with them. That's why they have the Aura of Death rule. Is it possible for Haslia to use this kind of, poisoning of existence itself as a weapon? Can it go to a city and just detonate it with death magic, just like Capitas is now? I have no real reason to think so, but that would be a very interesting weapon because it is like a game changer. How do you fight that? It is the latent power of a primordial god. I don't have an answer, but if you have one, I would love to read it in the comments down below. All of these things to wrap it up. Bone Golems, awesome models, very cool backstory. It adds a lot to the Old Dominion by really emphasizing how destructive the fall was, as well as how scary the Old Dominion on the march can be. They're bringing their own, fortifications with them in the form of golems. The castles of Capitas can march on your city half a world away. I love it. You'll love to see it. It's cool story stuff. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. And again, if you want to support me in the channel, please use that affiliate link. It means the world to me. Thank you so much for hanging out. And I will catch you all in my next Conquest lore video. Happy wargaming.